She told herself she'd never see him again. She told herself that 5 years was more than enough time to forget the shape of a shoulder, the cadence of a step, the specific way someone holds their head when they're lost in thought. She told herself that time heals all things, because that is the lie we tell ourselves when the truth is simply too heavy to carry. She was wrong on both counts, because standing there on that forgotten platform, surrounded by the cold hum of the evening commute, she realized some ghosts refused to stay buried. In the freezing rain, holding the exact same cracked umbrella he had pressed in her hands the night she vanished, he turned around. And for the first time in 5 long years, neither of them knew what to say. The world kept moving. Trains roared in the distance, but between them, time simply ground to a halt. This is the story of the goodbye she never got to finish. To understand the silence of the last 5 years, you have to go back to the beginning, to a time when the world felt entirely predictable and before the weight of choices had settled onto their shoulders. It was a crisp October afternoon at Uka University. Aiko was always running slightly behind. She lived her life in a perpetual hurry, convinced that if she didn't rush, the world would somehow leave her behind. That day, her arms were piled high with reference materials for a seminar she was already 10 minutes late for. One misstep, a loose strap, and her entire semester's worth of notes went scattering into the wind. Rin wasn't the type of person who noticed others. He was quiet, deliberately blending into the background, preferring the orderly predictability of his own thoughts to the chaotic noise of campus life. But when a heavy hardcover text slammed right against his shoe, he stopped. He looked up, seeing a frantic girl on the verge of tears, desperately trying to gather her life before the approaching storm ruined her notes. It started with that dropped textbook and a profoundly awkward apology. Rin had handed the book back, his fingers briefly brushing hers, and instead of walking away, he stayed to help her chase down the stray loose-leaf papers blown by the autumn breeze. By the time everything was collected, Aiko's seminar was long gone, and Rin had missed his train. So they sat on the steps and talked. What should have been an embarrassing accident turned into an hour of effortless conversation. Without either of them consciously planning it, one afternoon became a week, and a week became a season. They became fixtures in each other's lives. They established a quiet rhythm. They studied at the corner table in the library, the one where the radiator clinked rhythmically in the background. They learned each other's habits, how Aiko bit her lip when struggling with a translation, how Rin always ordered his coffee black, but would secretly steal the sugar packets from her tray. They walked home the long way every single evening, stretching out 15-minute commutes into 2-hour strolls just to have a few more moments together. They never explicitly used the word love. They didn't feel the need to rush it. In their minds, they had all the time in the world. Everyone around them, their friends, the professors who saw them together, the barista at the campus cafe, already knew. It was written in the way their strides matched perfectly when they walked. Then came the spring rains. It was the first time they truly shared an umbrella. Rin had popped it open outside the humanities building, stepping close to her to shield her from the sudden downpour. "It's small," he had murmured, his voice barely audible over the thunder. "But if we stay close, we won't get wet." Aiko had looked at his shoulder, already darkening from the rain, and felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the weather. Under that small canopy of canvas and metal wire, The world shrunk down to just the two of them. Every step was synchronized. The space between their hands felt heavy, charged with things they wanted to say, but kept locked behind closed lips. It was a perfect, fragile safety. But even the most beautiful spring eventually gives way to the heat of summer, and with it, the reality of the choices they had been avoiding. Aiko began to look at Rin not just with affection, but with a quiet, devastating panic. A secret was blooming in her chest, one that would threaten to tear down everything they had built without ever making a sound. The crack didn't start with a fight. It started with an email, followed by an official, heavy envelope postmarked from abroad. A prestigious graduate fellowship in Boston, an application Aiko had submitted nearly a year prior, long before Rin had ever caught her dropped books on the campus steps. It was a fully funded 5-year commitment, the opportunity of a lifetime, the exact future she had spent her entire youth praying for. She had 3 days to accept or decline. 3 days to choose between the meticulously planned destiny she had carved out for herself and the unscripted, beautiful life she never expected to want more. Every time she looked at the ticket, she saw her future. But every time she looked at her phone, she saw Rin. The conflict was paralyzing. How could she ask him to wait 5 years? How could she ask him to give up his own life for hers? On the final evening, Rin waited at their usual spot by the old clock tower. The sky was heavy, threatening another downpour. He checked his watch, smiling to himself, wondering what had distracted her this time. He sent a text. "I'm here. Don't rush. I'm not going anywhere." He didn't know that those words, meant to comfort her, only made the knot in her stomach tighten to a breaking point. 1 hour passed, then 2. The campus emptied out, leaving only the hollow echo of distant traffic. Rin called, but it went straight to voicemail. A cold dread began to pool in his chest. Aiko was never this late. She always texted. He sat on the bench, his fingers freezing, staring at the blank screen, entirely unaware that the girl he loved was currently standing less than a mile away, watching him from the shadows of the library arcade. She had tried to write it down. She had tried to explain the fear that gripped her, the terror of staying and wondering what if, balanced against the agonizing certainty of leaving him behind. But every word she penned looked cheap. Every explanation felt like an excuse. She realized that seeing his face, hearing his voice, would break her resolve. If he asked her to stay, she would, and she feared she would grow to resent him for it. So, she chose the coward's way out. She chose silence. When the rain finally began to fall in earnest, Aiko walked away, leaving her past behind on that wet wooden bench. She left the only piece of him she possessed, the plaid umbrella. It was meant to be a silent message, a way of saying, "I am leaving this with you because I cannot take your warmth into my new, cold world." But symbols are easily misunderstood when left in the dark. When Rin found it, he didn't see a poetic farewell. He saw an emergency. He picked up the damp canvas, his heart hammering against his ribs, calling her name into the empty night. He thought she had been hurt. He thought something terrible had happened. He ran to her apartment, knocked until his knuckles bled, but the windows were dark, and the landlord only offered a cold, indifferent confirmation. She checked out this afternoon. No note. No explanation, just an empty room and a used umbrella. Rin stood in the downpour, the very rain she had fled, realizing that the person who had rewritten his entire universe had vanished as if she had never existed at all. Days bled into months, and months hardened into years. The silence between them became a physical presence, a vast ocean that grew wider with every passing sunrise. At first, Rin stayed up late, staring at her social media profiles, waiting for an update, a picture, an explanation, anything to bridge the gap. But her accounts remained entirely dark. She had cut the cord completely. He graduated near the top of his class, but there was no joy in it. When his name was called, and he walked across the stage, his eyes instinctively scanned the audience, looking for a head of unruly hair and a frantic, cheering smile that he knew wouldn't be there. He realized then that the bitterest part of abandonment isn't the anger. It's the lingering habit of looking for them in a crowd. He took a job at a logistics firm in the city. He became the perfect employee, reliable, quiet, completely unfeeling. He moved into an apartment that looked more like a hotel room than a home. He dated occasionally, but the relationships were brief and shallow. Every time a girl laughed, or bit her lip, or grabbed his arm during a movie, his mind would instantly perform the cruel arithmetic of comparing them to a ghost. Thousands of miles away, Aiko lived her dream, only to find that dreams can be incredibly lonely places when achieved in isolation. She excelled in her program. She got her degree. She secured a position at a respected research institute. But success, she discovered, tasted like ash when you didn't have the one person you wanted to share it with. Every milestone she passed felt unearned, because the price she had paid was the only thing she truly valued. 100 times she had opened their old text thread. 100 times her fingers had hovered over the glass, typing out apologies, explanations, confessions of how much she regretted that rainy night. But pride, mixed with a profound sense of guilt, always stopped her. "He's probably happy now," she would tell herself. "I ruined his life once. Reaching out now would just be selfish." Pride is a strange, toxic thing. It convinces you that silence is an act of mercy when it is actually just a shield against the risk of rejection. And so, they remained parallel lines, running in the same direction, but destined never to intersect. Rin kept the umbrella. He didn't throw it away, nor did he use it. He tucked it into the dark corner of his closet, a dusty monument to the girl who had taught him how to love and then taught him how to hurt. They both convinced themselves that the other had moved on. It was easier to believe they were forgotten than to accept that they were both sitting in separate rooms, in separate cities, mourning the exact same loss at the exact same time. 5 years, 1,825 days of silence. It takes that long to build a completely new life, but it only takes a single second for it all to come crashing down. Aiko returned to her hometown on a gloomy Tuesday, called back for a minor family obligation. She had planned to slip in and out of the city like a ghost, leaving no trace. Walking through the station, the familiar sights and smells hit her with the force of a physical blow. The specific chime of the train announcements, the smell of the roasted chestnut vendor outside the east exit, it was a minefield of memories. She pulled her coat tighter around herself, picking up her pace, desperate to catch her connecting train and escape back to her sterile, safe life. But the sky had other plans. As she reached the exit, the clouds broke apart in a sudden, torrential summer storm. The downpour was so heavy it turned the street outside into a blurred sheet of gray. Commuters grumbled, backing away from the spray, digging through their bags for rain gear. Aiko searched her bag, only to realize her mistake. She had forgotten her umbrella in her rush to leave the hotel. She sighed, leaning against a concrete pillar, trapped. She watched the rain bounce off the asphalt, feeling an ironic, bitter sense of déjà vu. It always came back to the rain. Then, a shadow fell over her. From her right, a hand reached out into her field of vision. It wasn't a sleek, modern umbrella. It was a faded, distinctively patterned plaid canopy, its metal ribs slightly bent from years of storage. A voice, deeper than she remembered, but instantly recognizable, cut through the roar of the downpour. You always forget to check the forecast. It wasn't fate. It was simply a delayed train, a sudden storm, and a man who had finally decided to carry an old piece of baggage with him that day. But looking into his eyes, Aiko realized that some coincidences are far too cruel to be random. The 5 years between them dissolved in a single heartbeat. They didn't shout. They didn't cry. Instead, they walked to a quiet, dimly lit cafe tucked away in an alley behind the station. The kind of place where people go when they want to disappear. They sat across from each other, the distance of the small wooden table feeling wider than the ocean they had lived across for half a decade. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Rin stared down at his coffee, watching the steam rise and vanish into the air. He had spent 5 years rehearsing 1,000 different questions, 1,000 bitter accusations. But now that she was sitting less than 2 feet away, his throat felt dry, choked by the sheer volume of things left unsaid. It was Aiko who broke first. Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling with the weight of 5 years of accumulated regret. "I'm sorry," she said. And once the dam broke, the truth finally came pouring out. She told him everything. The acceptance letter, the paralyzing fear of failure, the terrifying certainty that she would drag him down with her, and the profound cowardice that made her choose silence over a painful goodbye. Rin listened without interrupting. The anger that had sustained him through the lonely nights, the bitterness that had hardened his heart, it all began to evaporate, replaced by a profound, aching sorrow. He realized that while he had been mourning her absence, she had been living in a prison of her own making. They had both been hurting, completely isolated by the walls they had built to protect themselves. As she spoke, the phantom of who they used to be seemed to sit at the table with them. He remembered the girl who had spilled her books. She remembered the boy who had saved them. They weren't those people anymore. Time had changed them, molded them into sharper, more guarded versions of themselves. But the foundation was still there, buried beneath the dust of 5 lost years. When she finished, she fell silent, burying her face in her hands, waiting for him to tell her to leave. Instead, Rin quietly picked up the plaid umbrella resting against the bench. He slid it across the polished wood, placing it between them. "I kept it," he said softly. "I don't know why. Maybe I always thought you'd come back for it. Or maybe I just wanted to remember that there was a time when the rain didn't feel so cold." Aiko looked down at the umbrella. It was worn, its colors faded by time, but it was whole. It had survived the 5 years of neglect, just as the unspoken bond between them had survived the silence. The question now hung in the air, heavier than the storm outside. What do you do with something that broke but refused to die? There's a terrifying moment when you realize you have a choice. You can let the past remain the past, walking away with the neat closure of an apology, or you can stretch out your hand and risk breaking your heart all over again. Aiko reached for the handle, and at the exact same moment, Ren's fingers closed over hers. The touch was electric, a sudden spark that cleared away the remaining shadows. For the first time in 5 years, they laughed. It was a soft, bittersweet sound, an echo of the campus steps, acknowledging the beautiful absurdity of their own stubbornness. They had wasted so much time being afraid. Some people believe that second chances are an illusion, that once a thread is snapped, the knot you tie to fix it will always leave a scar. And maybe that's true, but perhaps a second chance isn't about erasing the past or pretending the hurt never happened. Perhaps it's about looking at the scar and choosing to walk forward anyway. They stepped out into the clearing storm, closer than they had been in half a decade. The umbrella was still small, and the mist still threatened to damp their clothes. But as Rin angled the canvas to cover her shoulder, Aiko reached out and took his arm, anchoring herself to the present. They weren't the college students who had parted in silence. They were older, wiser, and deeply aware of how easily happiness can slip through your fingers if you don't hold on tight. 5 years of absolute silence. One old, cracked umbrella, and a choice that neither of them wanted to get wrong twice. The road ahead of them was unwritten, but for the first time in 5 years, they were walking it together. If you believe in second chances, or if you've ever had to leave something beautiful behind, let us know your story in the comments below. Your thoughts mean the world to us. And if this journey moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to Echoes of Us Anime. We bring you a brand new emotional story just like this every single week. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep your loved ones close and never leave your words behind in the rain.